welcome to another video. My name is Jazz, or V, whatever you like to call me. Welcome to my channel. I talk about books here, and today about all the books I read in December, and buckle up, it's a lot of books. Make sure to like and subscribe and click the notification bell, and then let's get into the books. Now in December I've read 10 books. That's the most I've read in any month last year in 2025, or ever, to be honest. Maybe when I was a child, maybe, but like in my adult life I've never read this many books in a month or this many stories. Yeah, we have to go through them, which means we have to get going. So the first book I read I finished reading was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. That was a book me and my friends picked for a book club we have together. It was the very first pick we had. We spun the wheel and it ended on that one, and oh, what a good first choice. I really enjoyed this book. So this book is an autobiographical book by Trevor Noah about his childhood and youth growing up in South Africa on the brink of the end of apartheid. So it's kind of like he experienced the end of apartheid and then what came afterwards. And I find this book so relevant and so important. It gives a person's perspective into what it felt like growing up in a country that segregated humans by color and coded them by color, and how he experienced crazy amounts of racism. And I found it very interesting. He gave a lot of historical background too, also on like racism as a system, how it's systematically built and how it was built in South Africa to make sure that people don't actually fight against the white minority. And I found that very impressive. I thought it was very impactful. It expanded my horizon. It was very good to read that. But I also have to say, although it's tragic, of course, and he didn't have an easy childhood, he definitely, he's a comedian and you can tell in his writing, and I thought it was really admirable how he managed to tell such a tragic story, sometimes really tragic stories or dangerous things or things that really go to the heart in a witty way and in a funny way. Like, I laughed out loud reading this book. It was really entertaining. I also added it to my honorable mentions for the year of 2025. It was definitely one of the best books I read last year. I read that book on my e-reader and I rated it 4 stars. Now, the next book I also read on my e-reader. This is my e-reader. I love it. I've had it for a few years and I love it. It's great. And the next book I also read on my e-reader, and it's Letters from Father Christmas by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, this is a book I'll definitely want to get physically because it makes more sense reading it as a physical book. So my tip for you, if you plan on reading it sometime, get it as a physical copy. I think it makes more sense than as an ebook. So this book is a collection of letters that Tolkien wrote to his own children around Christmas time. So Tolkien came up with a whole life of Father Christmas, and he just wrote letters out of the perspective of Father Christmas to his own children, and I think it's such a brilliant idea. It was admirable. It was so sweet. You really felt like you get into this like magical, whimsical world. It was kind of like, urban fantasy in a way, or magic realism maybe as well, because obviously it plays in our world, but then at the same time he's like doing this magical thing about Santa Claus and what he's doing, and I loved it. And the book was like that, so you always got the text and then you also got the original picture, which is why I'm saying it makes sense to actually get it as a physical copy, because then you can just look at it next to each other. And I also found it interesting because obviously the letters had like historical references in it, like real life references to the time he was living in. So there was a lot about the war as well, and how Santa Claus dealt with World War II and like these kinds of things. And I just thought it was so sweet, and I was sad when it ended because I was like, damn, I want to know what happens next. How's Santa Claus doing? What is this situation like? So yeah, really enjoyable read. It was really sweet, and it also made me think that would be something nice to do for your own kids if you have children, or like a niece or whatever. But it feels like such a nice, wholesome, warm thing to do, write letters like that. So yeah, very, very sweet book. The next book I read is called Affäre Halber Meter. Now, this book does not exist in English, unfortunately. It's by an author called Sabri Mussa, and it's by an Egyptian author, originally written in Arabic. And oh my god, so we go from Father Christmas fluff to tragedy in a way. So this book, it was not an easy read for me, to be honest. It's very thin, as you can see. So there's the main story, and then there are a few short stories in the back of the book, and I read the whole thing. And it's about a man, it's written from the man's perspective, that is in a relationship with a woman, and they have an affair. So basically they live in a country and culture where sex out of wedlock is outlawed, so it's illegal, and they're still doing it. And it's kind of like about how they navigating that, and like how they move in secrecy and stuff like that, and how he doesn't commit to her, and what that actually means for them, that he doesn't, you know, propose to her and wants to marry her, and what it means for her. It's still like that, right? If the woman, in a culture like that, if the woman sleeps with someone else, it's always a lot worse than if the man does. I see it in our culture as well. There's like this purity culture around women, and you can very much read about this in here. And the short stories, I have to say, there's a femicide in there, so like trigger warning. And it's like, this book is really focused on how women suffer at the hand of men, which is just very hard to read as well, because it's also like the main story written from the man's perspective, and I'm just so done reading from a man's perspective if the man is a horrible person. Not just horrible, but also completely no reflection, you know, no thinking about like what they actually do wrong. This book is very much that guy. I'm not saying the author thinks like that, but just the main character very much blames her for his pain, and I just felt that was so short-sighted of the main character. I think the author is very critical of that in the way he wrote him, I think so. But yeah, so it was not an easy read. It was tough to see, I have to say. It's not like I didn't like the book because of that necessarily, or the story it told. Even though the book was written 60 years ago, I think, it still holds relevance today, and that really just shows how little progress we're actually making. I mean, we've done a lot, right? But also just how certain beliefs are still just like ingrained in us. And yeah, I liked it, but you know, there are a lot of things that made me upset, and sometimes a book has to make you upset. But yeah, read it physically. I got this copy from the secondhand store. I don't know if you can buy the book still, but I got it at the secondhand store for like $2, which, you know, we take that, and I think it was a good read. It was very insightful. Alright, next book, I won't talk too much about it. It's Autonomy by Beate Rössler. I read this for university. It's a philosophical book. It's a theory on a definition for the word autonomy and how we can call someone autonomous or not. I've discussed this book at length with my colleagues at university. We always read a chapter every week and then discussed it. So there's a lot I could say. I find it interesting reading a theoretical book like that. It immediately made me look at the world through the lens of this theory. So I learned something from the theory, and I was like, does this person feel like they're that or that? Just based on what I've read in the book. Personally, I don't really agree with the author on the theory. Like, I think the theory as its own can stand like that, but it's not something I would agree with. I don't define autonomy the way she does, but I understand why she does it the way she did. And yeah, you know, wasn't my type of read. I read it anyways, of course, you know, I got ECTS points for it, right? Next up is another book I read for university, although I also read it for myself because I definitely wanted to read it, and it's Jim Knopf und Lukas der Lokomotivführer. In English, it's called Jim Button and Luke the Engine Driver, I think. Crazy. I'm sorry, but Luke, I mean, I understand, but that's a crazy title. Anyways, this book is about Jim, who is a boy who was delivered in a package to the island of Lumberland. I don't know what it's called in English, but he's delivered to that island. This island has 4 citizens, a king, Luke, one random ass dude, and the lady that will take care of Jim and raise him. And it's about how Jim and Luke go out into the world because they are trying to find another place to live in because the island is too small for all the people. And it's a children's book. It was written 1960, or it was published 1960, and I read the book and did a scientific analysis on stereotypes in it, so it's kind of hard for me to just talk about the book as I usually would. What I can say is I absolutely love the story. It's adorable. I think it's a very warm story, a very sweet story. However, and that's where my analysis comes in, there are some stereotypes against racialized people in here, and there's some extremely strong stereotyping on how women should be, which I think if you read this to children, I don't think you should, because there's just things in there that I think children are too impressionable. What I would do is I would read it maybe with older children and do an analysis of it, like in a school context, for example, but I would not read it to young children because there's strong stereotypes in there that I don't think work today. They should have never worked, but Just so you know, if you want to know more, actually just let me know. I can do a whole analysis on it. I wrote 18 pages of paper. I was very scientific with it. But yeah, I love the story still. It's still very precious to me, and you see, I've annotated a lot. I gave it 3 stars in the end because I think the story is good. There's just some issues with the book, and I think we need to be aware of that when we read, especially with children's books, because children just can't critically engage with a story. So we as adults need to make sure that these stories are accessible and also that they do not have any harmful content. Next up, I read a book technically as an ebook, but I printed it out because it was a PDF file, because that book is impossible. And it's called Tales of the Tikongs by Epeli Hauʻofa. It's a collection of short stories of the island of Tiko, which is so small that you can't find it on a map. It's a fictional island, of course, and it's somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, close to New Zealand from what you can read. And those 12 stories, they all play on Tiko, and they're all connected loosely. Like, it's clear that there's like a timeline somehow, and there's sometimes a character that shows up in 2 different stories. I read it because I really wanted to read a book by a Pacific Islander last year. I will try and read one again this year, and I found this book so impressive. It was very much about colonization and how like Christianity was brought to the Pacific Islands, but then also how like your mind gets colonized. I thought that was like the main big thing. It very much talked about when people try to go away from what colonizers brought to them, that they were criticized by their own people, that it's not right to do that. For example, people who stepped away from Christianity would then get called out by their family because they don't believe in the God, even though the God that they believe in is not their God, right? So it's a broad God. The book was very cynical as well. It was funny as well at some times. It was very critical of capitalism as well, and of like generalizing certain education standards and what that does with Native communities. I thought it was a very, very good read. Enjoyed it a lot. It was very insightful to read from the perspective of people who live in that culture and get colonized, and how they view it as well, and how critical like they can view it as well. And I thought it's a very good read. And that's also a book I would like to have, just because I would also like to give it to like people to read, because I think it's hard to get a copy because it's not very accessible at the moment. Next up, I read another classic on my e-reader, and I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So I've wanted to read this book for a while. I really loved the animated adaptation of it, and I watched it as a child like every year around Christmas time, and I was like, okay, this year's the year I will read it. So that book is about the character Scrooge, who is a wealthy man, and he does not like to share his money, and he does not like Christmas because he doesn't believe in the good spirit of Christmas either. So he doesn't believe in giving to other people and giving to family and spending time with family. And he's a very grumpy character, not very happy, and he gets visited by 3 ghosts, by the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future, to kind of help him change his views on what he thinks of Christmas. I thought it was very impressive how Dickens writes a grumpy character. He knows how to make a grumpy character, because he has this way of writing where if the grumpy character shows up, everything around this character, also like the clouds get darker, and like people go out of the way, and like the flowers get unhappy, just like things like that. It's like very clear that this is bad energy coming, and I really like how vividly he could paint that picture. As for the story, I really enjoyed it. It's definitely the same as the adaptations. It was just nice to actually read the original text of it. I also really liked how Dickens managed to write a Christmas story that plays on Christmas, that is not overly in your face pushing religion as well, because that's kind of a rare thing. And he managed to narrow down Christmas on what we actually more see today, how it's done in, at least in my country, less about religion and it's more about family and being together. And that's very much also the message of the book. It's less about being religious or following a religion or praying or going to church, and it's more about being nice to your next people and sharing love. I really liked that. That made me happy, because I just prefer reading books with weaker religious themes. Then I read 2 fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen. I have this fairy tale collection of his, and they were both in here. I read The Snow Queen and I read The Snowman. I'll first quickly say something about The Snow Queen. So The Snow Queen is actually a longer fairy tale. It has 7 parts, I think. It was actually like 50 pages or so. And it's about a boy who leaves his home to go north with the Snow Queen. He's kind of semi-abducted, I would say, and his friend, who's a girl who goes after him and goes to find him because he disappeared, and she wants to find him. She wants to get her friend back. And it's kind of about her adventure, how she gets there and the obstacles she has on the way. I really thought it was very beautifully written. I could imagine so many moments how they would look like as a picture drawn or painted. It was extremely imaginative. It was very well done on how you can actually imagine what happened. I also thought about how you can maybe like do something for this story in school, like in arts class, for example. And I just thought it was really, really beautiful. Personally, I thought it's called the Snow Queen, but there's not really a lot she does. She's not really a present character. Maybe I would have called it like the Mirror Shard or something. If you read it, you know why. Yeah, I would not have called the story the Snow Queen. It was very sweet. And then the other one is the Snowman, which is a lot shorter, and it's about a snowman who is built, and you know, he just exists, and he's newly born basically, and he has so many questions and doesn't understand what's going on, even though all the other things around him have always been there, and he's just new. How short his life also is as a snowman. He's built at the end of winter and then he just melts away. Touching as well, and I also found it a very sweet story, and it kind of put like this whole into perspective how time can be perceived so differently depending on what you do and what comes for you. So yeah. Then next up, I did some of my French reading, and I read The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I hope my camera survived the white cover. It hates white covers. So I've wanted to read The Little Prince for a while. I have multiple friends who say it's their favorite book of all time, their favorite story of all time, and I was like, okay, let's go. I need to read this. And I decided to read it in French because I tried to read books in French. My goal is to read 2 a year or 1 per semester, just that I get my French reading going a little bit. I think it was a very cute story. I see why it's a classic. I see why my friends love it. It's about a prince who lives somewhere on a planet, and he comes to Earth. Yeah, he kind of experiences the universe and learns about the universe on his journey to Earth and on Earth, and then he goes back home. I think what makes the book good are actually the illustrations, because the illustrations are part of the story. In my opinion, the book could not work or would not be as popular as it is if it didn't have these very iconic illustrations of this little prince on his planet, and it just, there's an illustration almost for every single chapter, and they are so cute. They're made by the author himself, just very, very sweet. And then finally, the last book I read in the year of 2025 was The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. That was a big one. I listened to it as an audiobook. I was worried I will not manage in that month, but I did. It was so long. I think it was like 45-hour audiobook, and the last book is also that long. So The Mad Ship is the second book in the Life Ship Traders series. So I can't say too much about what it is, but generally it's about these ships that are alive, that have a soul, and it's kind of about the secret behind how these ships exist, and it's very interesting how it's uncovered. It's really hard to explain what's going on, but at the center of it stands a family. The family is called Westrid, and the main characters are the women of the Westrid family, 100%. They are the main people, and they live in Bingtown, which is the city all the Life Ship Traders live in. In the first book, is very much about the second daughter called Althea, who has been living on the ship all her life and grew up on the ship. And now in the second book, the focus shifts a little bit. And it's a multi-POV book, so you get like many different POVs, and the story is kind of all coming closer and closer together. You can feel that, and I'm really glad I read this second book. I loved the first one. I really loved the second one. The second one, the things are now like clear. Things are coming together. You know where this is going, and it's crazy. It's gonna be crazy. I already downloaded the third book. I will listen to it in January, and I'm very excited about that. I'm really glad I continued. And maybe controversial take, my current favorite character is actually Malta. If you would have told me that half a year ago when I read the first book, I would have been like, are you crazy? Malta is insufferable. But Malta in book 2, she had so much character development. I loved how she, like, the person she became. Amazing. And I thought it was a bit sad that Althea just didn't change much. Like, oh Tia, what are you doing? So that's what I can say about the Mad Ship. And by the end of January, I hopefully can tell you something about the entire series, because I will have finished it. That was the last book of the month of December and also of the year of 2025. This is the end of this video. Let me know down below, what was your favorite read of December 2025? My favorite read was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, and then definitely The Life Ship Traders. But to be honest, I've had so many good reads in December, it's really hard to choose, and they are so different from each other. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the notification bell. I upload every Monday, even though this video is probably a little late, at 9 p.m. I try to, as you can see. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.